We have great scripture ahead of us today. It is from the book of Acts. It is Acts 16, verses 9 through 15, and let us share in the hearing and the reading of that word. During the night, Paul had a vision. There stood a man of Macedonia pleading with him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." When he had seen the vision, we immediately tried to cross over to Macedonia, being convinced that God had called us to proclaim the good news to them. We set sail from Troas and took a straight course to Samothrace, the following day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is a leading city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. We remained in the city for some days. On the Sabbath day, we went outside the gate by the river, where we supposed there was a place of prayer. And we sat down and spoke to the women who had gathered there. A certain woman named Lydia, a worshiper of God, was listening to us. She was from the city of Thyatira and a dealer in purple cloth. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. When she and her household were baptized, she urged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my home." And she prevailed upon us. May God add blessing and understanding to the hearing of this word this day. It is God's will that we receive three things from Him as gifts we seek. The first is that we will seek willingly and diligently without sloth, as that may be with His grace, joyfully and happily, without unreasonable depression and useless sorrow. The second is that we wait for Him steadfastly, out of love for Him, without grumbling and contending against Him to the end of our lives, for that will only last for a time. The third is that we have great trust in Him, out of complete and true faith, for it is His will that we know that He will appear suddenly and blessedly to all His lovers. For He works in secret, and He will be perceived, and His appearing will be very sudden. And He wants to be trusted, for He is very accessible, familiar, and courteous. Blessed may He be. These are words that I expect you have not heard before. Has anybody heard that particular quote or reading? It comes from a woman named Julian of Norwich. Does that sound any more familiar to anyone? Maybe a few of us have heard her name before. She is venerated in the Anglican Church and in the Lutheran Church. But from that church, which was the church, the Catholic Church, for so many years, they don't say much about her. Possibly the reason is that she wrote in the 14th century and into the 15th century. But she was a woman. And in that day and time, and there were many women who wrote during that time, theological things that came to them in special and unique ways. And yet, they were discounted. They were not held up high like some of the male writers of the time. We don't know much about Julian. It's unsure whether she was a nun living in a community or what. We just don't know. Probably because she was a woman. What we do know is that she got very ill from the plagues during that time of life. And as she was on the tail end, maybe even her deathbed, she received a particular vision from God. This vision came to her in what became many writings, many chapters that she wrote in a short form just after the illness subsided. Then she went on about 20 years after those original visions to write more, giving more theology, more theological thought to what she believed. What we heard this morning is just a sampling of her thought, but she's well respected. If you have the chance to read something of Julian of Norwich, your life will be blessed. for she has received something unique, in a unique way. But she's not alone. On Easter, remember, we talked about Mary Magdalene going to the tomb, and the fact that God revealed the news of new life and resurrection to her first, not the disciples, but to a woman. Unusual. God turning the world upside down on its ear, giving a message to one who wasn't supposed to have it first. Kind of like God turning the world upside down with Adam and Eve. They didn't die like they were supposed to. They were kicked out. Abram and Sarah, 90 years old, 100 years old, and they have a child? Really? This is the God we serve. This is the God who says, if you have a message, oh Bob Bowen, take it to the people of your town. You probably felt unlikely and unworthy, just like the original heirs of any good news message that needs to be spoken. But you speak it. Lydia is no different. Paul and his companions are going throughout the countryside. You have to understand, Jesus dies. Paul is converted and has his ministry. Then we get the Gospels. If you're looking at the documents of the New Testament in a historical fashion, you would read Paul and all of his writings before you would ever read the Gospels, because his work is first. And so, in that time, there are believers of all sorts and shapes and histories. There are Jews who believe that Jesus is the Messiah. They have a special understanding of what Messiah means. For it is out of the Jewish faith that we get that sense of what Messiah is supposed to be. Conqueror, deliverer, restoring Israel, so that they can have their country and their unique relationship again. There are also those who were not Jews, Gentiles, who began to believe in Jesus in a very special way. Did they have the history of understanding what Messiah meant? No. But because Jesus didn't come and be the Messiah that he was supposed to be, according to the tradition, they had a glimpse of who he was and what he meant to the world. And they began to believe. And just like any church split, there are those on the opposite side who do not believe as Jesus as the Messiah. They see him as, at best, a prophet, but one who was killed. A false prophet mostly, but definitely not the Messiah. It is in this time that there's conflict. Where do people worship? If you believe that Jesus is the Messiah, can you still go to the temple and be alongside those people who don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah? There's conflict that will later lead to wars. We know that from history. It is during this time of confusion, this time of trying to comprehend just who Jesus is, that Paul is doing ministry. And he comes to the city of Philippi, and there is no established worship center. There's no church. There's no temple. They go outside the city of Philippi to a place where they suppose would be people praying together. And they're all women. Go figure. And Lydia hears the word. And she and all of her household is baptized. That's the way that it happened in those days. Lydia is a Gentile. Lydia is a successful business woman. In fact, she gets her name Lydia from the place where she came from, the place where purple cloth is manufactured. She sells purple cloth. We just look and go, hey, purple cloth. There are people wearing purple today. It's a regular color. Not in that day. Purple cloth was only for the wealthy. Purple was only worn by those who could afford it. She is a successful businesswoman in a time when women didn't do that. She is a successful leader in the church at Philippi. From that point on, as Paul tries to establish a congregation in that city, she becomes a leader. When you think about Paul and what Paul says about women, what do you think? Because he has a very famous passage in another place in his writings, and he says women should sit down and shut up. That's what we think about Paul. But maybe Paul is a contextual man. Maybe in that time and in that place where he was writing to that particular group of people, there were some people who happened to be women who were causing conflict when they didn't need to. But in Philippi, he does not say that. In Philippi, he lifts Lydia up to be a leader in the church. A pretty amazing thing. Maybe again, God turning the world on its ear, saying things can happen in new and exciting ways by people you don't expect. Lydia says, if you truly believe that I have come to follow in the way of Jesus, come and stay at my house. Which Paul and his companions do. Paul must have believed that Lydia's conversion was true. We've lifted up a lot of women this morning, but it's not just women, it's all of us. It is all of us. No gender, no age, and no ethnicity. In my opinion, every religion needs people to stand up and be truly faithful. I'm sure you've heard of someone called Mahatma Gandhi. You've heard of Gandhi. Maybe you don't know much about him, but you've heard of him. He started his life, his professional life in England. Did you know that? As a lawyer. And as he became more faithful, he began to stand up for what he thought was right, especially when it came to his homeland of India. He had a way about him, a nonviolent way, a peaceful way, a way that was built on love and trust of the divine. And so he lived his life purely, maybe as purely as anyone since the time of Jesus. His work in his early days influenced the nation of South Africa to change their ways and their treatment of the people of India. His people were so proud of that and so taken by his ways that they called him back home. They elected him to parliament, and he was influential as they sought their independence. Once independence was gained, he lost political influence, but he remained a faithful person. You know, he read lots of different religions. He just settled on Hindu. But he allowed himself to be influenced by other types of readings and other types of thoughts, theological thought. He was a prophet. He said that Hindus and Muslims in my part of the world should be friends. And for that stance, he was assassinated by another radical Hindu. Such shame. He once wrote, I'm going to try to do it from memory, but I'm going to have my notes just in case. He once wrote that it is no nonviolence if we merely love those who love us. Hear those words again. It is no nonviolence if we merely love those who love us. It is nonviolence only when we love those who hate us. I know how difficult it is to follow this grand law of love. But are not all great and good things difficult to do? Love of the hater is the most difficult of all. But by the grace of God, even this most difficult thing becomes easy to accomplish if we want to do it. A prophet, words that could be spoken by any person in any religion, words that we need to hear, just like last week. I so wanted to stand up here at the end of Youth Sunday and applaud and congratulate our youth. Hopefully you've read my newsletter article. Someone met me at the door and said, "The youth did a great job, you're fired." Someone else came up here to the front and spoke to the preacher of the day and said, "Kelly's got to pick up his game." I don't feel threatened or challenged. It was a great worship service. And the reason I didn't stand up here at the end of church to do that was because it was worship. Our youth were worship leaders. They weren't performing a play. They weren't. It was worship. Thank you for being such great leaders of worship last week. No age. Maybe you've heard of Maddie J.T. Stepanek or Stepanek. I know that I'm probably crucifying that last name. Maddie wrote this book when he was like 12 or 13. It was a series of poems that he had been writing through his very difficult life. You see, he died in 2004 at the age of 14. His book became a bestseller. He went on to the Oprah show and many others. He lived with muscular dystrophy. But he saw goodness in life. And he found God at an early age in ways that most of us would be jealous of in later life. And he wrote about it. There are so many good poems in here about faith and about God, but I think the most important one is that we need to read about the heart songs, because he says, Journey Through Heart Songs. This is his title. Hear the poem. I have a song deep in my heart, and only I can hear it. If I close my eyes and sit very still, it is so easy to listen to my song. When my eyes are open, I am so busy and moving and busy. If I take time and listen very hard, I can still hear my heart song. It makes me feel happy, happier than ever, happier than everywhere and everything and everyone in the whole wide world. Happy, like thinking about going to heaven when I die. My heart song sounds like this. I love you. I love you. How happy you can be. How happy you can make this whole world be. And sometimes it's other tunes and words too, but it always sings the same special feeling to me. It makes me think of Jamie and Katie and Stevie and other wonderful things. This is my special song. But do you know what? All people have a special song inside their hearts. Everyone in the whole wide world has a special heart song. If you believe in magical, musical hearts, and if you believe you can be happy, then you too will hear your song. A 14-year-old? Julian says, we are to seek willingly, wait steadfastly, and to put great trust in God. How else will we find our heart song? How else will we find our happiness? How else will the world know peace? No matter what your age, no matter what your gender, no matter what your ethnicity, God calls you to help turn the world on its ear and bring the word of faith and peace to all whom you meet. May it be so.